All right, welcome to the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric. We're back for a solo Friday show. Last week, myself, Tej, a few others were in Philadelphia to watch that, kind of scintillating matchup, I think, between Philadelphia and Minnesota, two of the teams that won 13 or more games in the NFC last season. One quick thing here. I got to turn on the light here so everybody can see my face here a little bit brighter in my office. Sorry for being a little bit late. We had some meetings that went up until this time, but we thank you all for being here for this show. Firstly, before I get going here, I'm going to promote a few of the things that we got going on the SumerSports YouTube page, as well as all the podcast feeds. We have Stats and Scheme with NYGvsSF and Sean Syed. That's every single Tuesday. They don't go live, but they do post it later on in the day. Really good views and listener numbers on this, so I'm really excited about that. We also have Parker Fleming's Odd Man Front, where Parker interviews people from the industry, it's terrific. He does his every Thursday, so those are some things to think about as you consume your content every single week. Obviously, SumerSports.com is your place to go as well for all of your football watching needs. Let's go ahead and look at what's being, what's going on here on the website this week. We have obviously our front page. We have our preview article. We have the Thursday 3 from Sean Syed. We have the Football Friday by me, where I go ahead and talk through some things, trends I'm monitoring, which is we'll talk about a little bit later, which is the lack of explosive offense in the NFL. I'm buying the Cardinals, drafting 2 quarterbacks high next year. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well. And I'm selling Kyle Pitts because there's so many reasons for the Falcons to want to give the ball to Kyle Pitts, and yet they don't. A few other things to look at. We have our league table here. Now, this was not updated after last night, but we have our league table with opportunities to win the Super Bowl, get the first pick, et cetera. And we also have pages for teams as well. Tua Tagovailoa leading the league in total EPA passing, but we also have the same data for defense as well as carriers of the ball and things like that. I really like this relative yards per carry metric, which takes into account a lot of game situations and looks at how efficient a player has been independent of the situation that they're going up against. So a very good source for all the information that you're going to need on the NFL. We're getting a few people into the chat here, hopefully on this Friday afternoon in Atlanta here. Let's briefly talk about last night's game. The New York Giants were now 1-2. They're fresh off of coming back from 21 back and beating Arizona. They went on the road as 10.5-point underdogs against the San Francisco 49ers in a rematch of a couple conference title games. 2011, the Giants went into San Francisco and won. 1990, they went into San Francisco and won. And then, of course, there was the Trey Junkin game where the Niners actually prevailed at home after coming back for multiple scores and winning there. So they've had a storied history. Last night was not a part of that storied history. We're going to go ahead and go to Sumer Sports' Twitter page here, at Sumer Sports on Twitter, and look at sort of what happened in last night's game. A kind of a mirror image here, interestingly, with the Giants negative 0.21 EPA per play. Whereas the Niners were plus 0.21 EPA per play. And just a reminder for those who are a little bit new to this, EPA is just expected points added. It adds a point value to every single play as opposed to a yardage value because, for example, getting a 2-yard run on 3rd down and 1 is a better play than getting a 2-yard run on 3rd down and 3. And so you want to be able to dictate that. Interestingly, for the Niners, and this has been true about them for a long time, success rate was above median, 57th percentile, but still not nearly as high as their EPA. And that's been very true about the Niners offense for quite some time. They are more explosive than they are efficient, if that makes sense, which, is part of it. They did have a really good late down success rate, which they were poor at against the LA Rams. So a little bit of a mean reversion there for them as well. The Giants, 3.19 yards per play. No Andrew Thomas, one of the best left tackles, if not the best in all of football. No Saquon Barkley, and a wide receiving core and tight end, and Darren Waller, who are still trying to find themselves. So in many ways, this was kind of the expected outcome for Daniel Jones and the offense. But, not turning the ball over kind of kept the game close. I mean, it was 17-12 at one point in the second half after a punt return and a penalty that kind of got the Giants into good field position. Really did, make the game compelling for as long as possible. But make no mistake, the Giants were clearly outclassed in this game. And we hope, they have the hardest schedule moving forward prior to that game last night. We hope that they can, kind of right the ship here because, we root for regimes here. We root for all regimes and we want the Dable and Joe Shane regime to do well. I think the thing lightens up, right? You don't get Dallas and San Francisco, the two best teams in the NFC, in my estimation, in the first 3 weeks and expect to have that much success. So a couple of things I want to talk about, as we get into the weekend. I think that this one's going to be a little bit shorter. The first thing I want to talk about, which is in my article, was, the going for 2 down 7 thing. So we're in the link the other night, and the Vikings now. Some of this has some point spread to it, right? We follow the spreads a little bit, and the Vikings opened at about 8-point underdogs against the Eagles. They closed. If you looked at Circa, it was 5.5. Most places was 6 at close. The Eagles were favored by, and so there was obviously point spread drama. A lot of people were, I think, maybe rightfully questioning whether or not the Eagles should have gone for 2 when they were up 12 on on a few of those touchdowns, where the Vikings got the thing to 6. The Eagles scored to make it 12. In both occasions, they only took it to 13. I think it's a reasonable question to ask as to why you don't end up going for the 2 there, because 12 is still 2 touchdowns to beat you. So there isn't like necessarily a probability pile up at any one particular point, but like 11 or 10. So there wasn't really a downside to going for 2 as much. And of course, there's a ton of upside because there's some probability pile up at 14. So that was a good question, I think, that people had of the Eagles. And ultimately, so that's a big deal there. And so when the Vikings scored both times to go down 7, I looked over at Tage and a few other people, John Terramina of True Media, formerly the Falcons, Amelia Probst of PFF, and Zach Drapkin, who was also, an Eagles member of their analytics. I'm like, should they go for 2 here? And I'm thinking to myself, the reason is like, for one, you kind of want to at least have the threat of an onside kick, right? If you kick an onside kick and you're only up 6 or down 6, they get 1 first down, they get into field goal range, they make a field goal, you're down 9 in the game, you're out of it basically. But if you're down only 5, you kick an onside kick, you maybe don't get it. Or you probably don't get it, as Michael Lopez pointed out to me. You probably don't get it, and very likely don't get it. And you hold, or hopefully the team against you will lay up a little bit, kick a field goal to go up 8. You still have an opportunity, albeit a small one, to come back. We saw the Colorado Buffaloes down 8, starting at their own 2-yard line, were able to come back and win that game. So it's certainly not impossible, but it's less impossible than being down 9. I went back and looked, and usually 2-point conversion decisions don't really give you much in the way of a discrepancy because the expected value on both is about the same. Obviously, the variances are different. But we saw an over a percent edge in the first touchdown for going for 2 for Minnesota, and a less than 1% edge, but a positive one in going for 2 on that second one. So it does make sense. And I think when you think about the sort of different, and you go to SumerSports.com and read the article, you look at sort of the different paths to winning, and you just have more ways to win when you're down 5. And the reason is, and this is sort of the second point, if you go to my Friday football column, NFL defenses have gotten a lot better this year at limiting scoring. Scoring was down in the first week of the season was like the lowest scoring week we've seen in like 2 decades. The second week was a little bit better for offenses, but still not great. Expected points added per play over the first 2 weeks of the NFL season is lower than all but 1 year since 2010, and that was 2017, a year with a lot of injured quarterbacks. And so that's not great. But I wanted to look actually at play success, because I feel like defenses are optimizing for this now. And when I looked at play success, so just like the likelihood that a play gets expected points or not, or series success, which is the likelihood a first down is turned into another first down. Those numbers are down, but not nearly as much, very, very slight compared to the expected points added. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, our intuition about the NFL is that for a long time is that scoring is up. It's hard to stop offenses. And over the past, I thought to myself a little bit introspectively, should I actually adjust this? Should we give defenses a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt when it comes to stopping offenses? And because scoring's down and expected points are down and everything, maybe we should allow defenses to try to protect more of the field when they're down and give an opportunity to them. Kansas City, should they have punted on fourth down and 25 rather than give the ball back to the Detroit Lions with a smaller field and so forth? And my contention has always been, in a high-scoring league environment, you almost have to assume that the other team against you is going to get a field goal and play around that. And just want that to happen as quickly as possible, as opposed to giving them the whole field and allowing for that. So, and when I looked at play success and series success, like basically offenses are almost as good as they have been in some of these high scoring years, save for the pandemic year. So our assumptions with respect to just getting one stop on one offensive drive or one offensive series, they should be the same as in the past, meaning if you kick the ball back to an opposing offense, especially if you're a defense like Minnesota or but an average defense even similarly, you should not expect to be able to get a 3-and-out. That to me is the biggest thing. Is series success is closer to 70%. And so even though scoring is down, teams are making offenses be successful after successful after successful. No big plays. The individual series success is actually enough where I would still not lean on my defense and trust my defense at the end of a game to get one stop when trailing. And so that's the genesis of that entire article. Go ahead and go read it at SumerSports.com. The second thing that I wanted to talk about, and something that I'm buying, I'm buying the fact that I think that the Cardinals should take two quarterbacks in the first round. And I know that, there are very sharp people who have come back and said, well, only one guy gets to play. And, this is different. Like you don't, if you're a team that takes wide receivers, like Detroit took 3 wide receivers in a row. And if you're in Seattle, you take Jackson Smith-Njigba when you had DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett on contracts and stuff. And you can always kind of blend them. In the NFL, the one quarterback in a perfect world plays the whole game. So I understand the pushback. However, the quarterback position is interesting for young players. And I said this on Twitter, maybe I didn't say it, I didn't articulate myself the best. But I think that young quarterbacks are still figuring out how to play the position. And this is true about runners like Anthony Richardson and more pocket passers like Stroud and Young. They're trying to learn how to play the position and make their reads and make their, make the throw actually, like to execute the accuracy, that they don't necessarily have the mental capacity left to prepare themselves for hits sufficiently to stay healthy. And when you look across the league, and even like the best quarterback that's going right now, and probably the best quarterback we've seen in a long time, Patrick Mahomes, like he sometimes struggles with injury. And I think that that's almost the last step for him to basically being the GOAT is injury avoidance, right? Not getting your ankle injured against Jacksonville, not getting the concussion against Cleveland, not having turf toe, I think subsequent to that. And when I look back at the Peyton Mannings and the Tom Brady's and the Dan Marinos, although Marino did tear his Achilles one year and Brady, injured his ACL. I mean, Dan Marino one season went a whole year with allowing 6 sacks. And so I'm a fan of, this idea that if you draft 2 quarterbacks high, chances are, just because of the way this thing is, you're going to have to play that second guy anyway, right? We're going to see Andy Dalton this week. We're going to see Gardner Minshew this week. Wouldn't those 2 teams love to display for all to see another young rookie contract quarterback for everybody to come in and try to trade for? I think it's too sharp. And I'm going to get to this question by Lee Ollie in a second here because I think it's really good. But if you think about what's the path to the Cardinals, they're clearly, they're over 30% to get the first pick. the 30% to get the first pick themselves, and they're over 46% to own the first pick because Houston has a 16% chance to own it as well, and that's their pick. If they get the first and second pick, they're going to be able to hold that second one for a ransom for Drake May. I don't think that they should take Drake May second. What I'm saying is you trade out of the second pick. You trade Kyler Murray. Those two trades are going to get you at least 2 first-round picks later in that draft. So if you go and say, okay, take Caleb Williams first, you take a premium position player, edge, offensive tackle, wide receiver, cornerback in like the 10, 11, 12 range, and then you get into like the 18 to 32 range, and you take Bo Nix or Shadur Sanders or somebody. I'm not evaluating those quarterbacks yet, but there's going to be somebody there worthy of that pick. And you go into the season now with Caleb Williams and that guy playing together. Caleb Williams, gets injured. Now you can display him for him to all to see. And we've only seen that a couple times. In Dallas in 1989, they used the first overall pick on Troy Aikman because of an epic meltdown. I don't know if my friend Aaron Nag was listening, but like the Packers were 2-12 with 2 games to play, beat the Vikings, knocked them out of the 1 seed. And I won week 17 as well. So they got 12-4. They ended up with Tony Mandarich at 2. Cowboys lose out. They get Troy Aikman at 3-13. They got Aikman, and then Jimmy Johnson, who was in his first year as the head coach, used the supplemental draft in 1989 to take Steve Walsh, who was his quarterback at Miami. Steve Walsh, far less talented than Troy Aikman, but had that connection and was certainly worthy of a first-round pick at the time. Because the Cowboys went 1-15 in 89, that pick that they surrendered in the supplemental draft ended up being the first overall pick in the 1990 draft. So, a lot, right? And, Troy Aikman started 11 games as a rookie, went 0-11. Steve Walsh started 5, won the 1 game that they did in Washington that year. Was not very good. However, the next year, Saints quarterback Bobby Hebert in 1990 held out. Saints were good enough. They had the Soul Patrol dome defense that they had. So they traded a first, second, and third for Steve Walsh, right? Like these things, they make sense. The only other time we've ever seen a team using their first 2 picks on quarterbacks, Washington trades up with St. Louis, RG3. Their next pick is in the 4th round. They take Kirk Cousins. Obviously, that worked because RG3 was phenomenal as a rookie, but he was phenomenal as a rookie, but he wasn't good enough, obviously, to sustain himself because of injuries and things like that. Cousins has ended up being a pretty damn good quarterback in the NFL and was a good value to Washington. Interestingly enough, like, to the point where Kyle Shanahan offered them a second for him, and like they never even, there was value generation there, and so I really am a fan of that move for Arizona. I think it's also true that Arizona is so far away necessarily from having a big roster that like the 1 first-round pick you're going to build up giving around them is going to be. It's not going to matter if the quarterback's not any good, and so now you have 2 shots at the quarterback being good. In addition, with the Murray trade and with the trade of the second high pick that they're going to likely get from Houston, you're going to be able to back into, getting enough players on the offensive line, the secondary, and things like that to be good. So I think it's a sharp move. We do have this question from Liali, which I really like, Liali 5, picking up from Jason OTC. So he's talking about Over the Cap, his podcast, which is my favorite podcast. It's Jason just talks to himself for 2 hours about really fun, smart NFL things. And he goes, how much would Arizona need to give up for Jefferson? The Vikings would love to have May. I'm not sure if they would, but that's a good hypothesis. Maybe the Vikings would take Murray anyway. We've seen this with Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, right? We've seen this with, they traded for Jalen Reagor, a first-round pick that busted. They traded for Ross Blacklock, a defensive tackle in the 2nd round from Houston who busted. Now, both of those guys were cut this year. So those both were kind of swings and misses, but they traded for TJ Hawkinson, who is now the highest paid tight end in NFL history. So that one worked. Traded for Cam Akers this week as well. So Kwesi is very willing to go out there and actually, buy low on players. Now, Murray would be a quintessential buy low option. As my article says, it would be $46 million in dead money for Arizona. And the team that acquired him, there's a $35 million guaranteed P5 in 2024. There's also a roster bonus. I can't remember the size of it that becomes guaranteed the fifth day of the league year. So the team that trades for him is going to get a haul, right? So Arizona may not a haul in terms of costs. So the team, it might not be like a top 10 pick that gets Murray. It might not be a top 20 pick that gets Murray. But it's probably going to be a first round pick, at least just one. And so I could see Kwesi doing it for sure. I think that, one of the issues with Minnesota is they have great tackles. They need to get some interior offensive linemen. That might be a little bit of a reason not to go after a guy like Murray and go for more of a sturdier quarterback. But I don't hate that. To answer the initial question, which is, how much does Arizona need to give up for Jefferson? Well, let's look at some kind of common trades here. So, and AJ Brown was, a pick in the late teens, like 18, I want to say, for Philadelphia. Had to give up for AJ Brown in 2022. Tyreek Hill was a first, and Tyreek Hill was a third contract guy, so we have to be careful here. That's more on kind of, and I'm going to bring up Randy Moss in a second. Randy Moss was a third contract guy as well when he was traded from Minnesota to Oakland. It was, Tyreek Hill was a first and a it's 5 draft picks, and the highest of them was like the 30th pick. So I would say if you're Arizona, you probably would have to give up at least a first. Randy Moss went for the 7th pick, a linebacker named Napoleon Harris, and a 7th round pick, just to see. So I don't actually know if it's going to be that much, especially if what the Vikings are holding out for is having to pay a wide receiver $30 million. If the Cardinals, and we talked about this with the Chicago Bears last year, you can't just rebuild your roster with the draft, especially if you're going to have cap space. You have to rebuild your roster with some premium position players that you don't necessarily have to develop if you want to be competitive. So Jefferson would be a huge play to that aim. They have Marquise Brown under contract as well. I believe that would help a lot as well. They need a pass rusher. They need some corners. So they probably will try to use some of the assets that they acquire, whether that be for the Drake May pick or whether that be for Kyler Murray, to acquire an actual premium position player from another team who's a veteran, a la DJ Moore from Chicago. Now, Chicago probably wishes they had Brian Burns instead, but Carolina did not want to play ball on Brian Burns for them or with LA, who offered them 2 future firsts. So that's a little bit of that. I'm excited for sort of what Arizona is going to be able to do. This is clearly a clean slate, and it'll be fun to see what they end up doing with the assets and the things that they've been able to acquire while they've torn it down post Steve Keim and post Cliff Kingsbury. Okay, before I leave, I want to talk a little bit about the Falcons, because I was at the game the other day between the Packers, and as somebody who had a high projection on Pitts this year, I'm a little disappointed. I think they're very serious about not giving Kyle Pitts the ball necessarily as much as maybe they should. And I just don't get it. I think Kyle Pitts is incredibly efficient. I think he's very good. The other part that really, sticks in my craw a little bit is like the economics of it don't make sense, right? We all know. And I missed this when it happened. So I'm not sitting here trying to, I'm being a armchair GM here when I do this. But when you use the 4th overall pick, it's about an $8 million APY. Hawkinson's contract is about 17.5 million APY. If you assume the NFL market is efficient, which it's not, but let's assume for a second, then you're representing about 9 million of surplus value if Pitts ends up being the best tight end in all of football, which is good, but it's a lot. Now, Jamar Chase in that same draft was picked 5th, makes about the same amount of money. Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins are all basically kind of in that $25 to $30 million range. So assuming the market is efficient, you're talking about a surplus that's almost twice as much to twice as much as you would get for Pitts for a guy like Chase. And so all of that when you listen to that, you realize that the Falcons are at a real disadvantage when it comes to even making that pick worth it. And so similar, and the same thing's true about Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson making 8 or 9 million right now. The NFL top guy is at 16 at running back. So at best, you're thinking about $8 million surplus. But at least with Bijan Robinson, they're giving him the football and they're making him approach that high end, output at running back. And they're giving themselves a chance there. They're not giving themselves a chance to make that Pitts contract worthwhile. And you add to that, of course, the fact that unlike running back, tight end takes a while to progress. It's a position that is, where even the best athletes struggle, at least initially, because the position is incredibly physical. So you're learning how to be kind of a lineman at times. And there's all the nuances to an NFL passing game that make it difficult. It's a head scratcher. So I need to see Kyle Pitts get targets before I imagine it again. And it's sad because I love that position, having played it before. Beat Gamer 99, a loyal listener, said Pitts proving that the second contract tight end is the most value. Absolutely. Almost every time when you draft a tight end high, you're drafting somebody else's tight end. Good on Cleveland for getting out in front of Njoku, not bailing on that pick because, he ultimately has ended up being good, but Hawkinson, Ebron, Greg Olsen was better in his second stop. Jared Cook was better in his second, third, fourth, fifth stops than he was in his first stop, et cetera, et cetera. You look at that position and it's just absolutely apparent that drafting them high is so risky for so many reasons. And the one risk I didn't think I'd see for Pitts was usage. I did not see them saying, we're not going to throw to him. I figured he might struggle and he might, but after getting 1,000 yards as a rookie, granted it's in the 17-game schedule, but after getting 1,000 yards as a rookie, I figured that they would at least give him the volume to make the pick worth it. But that is an assumption I can no longer make. Awesome. Let's think about some games this weekend before we go. Let me actually pull up here our watchability scores because our great data scientist, Tage Seth, and company have been, really going hard at this model here. And I think it's produced a really good value for people. So let's go ahead and share our Twitter account at Sumer once again. These are the watchability scores for this weekend. And the reason that the Chargers are so high, firstly, that total for Chargers Vikings was sitting at 49.5 on the look ahead. An absolute joke. This thing has been bet up to 4.5 points. Actually, bet 5 points. Now it's come back a little. Professionals will always like to take totals in that range when there's some value. But yeah, that game has a close spread. Vikings -1. They were previously +2 on the look ahead. You have two kind of average-ish teams playing in Minnesota with a high total. That's going to lead to a high watchability score. In fact, the 1 o'clock hour, there's not a ton you can complain about. Saints Packers should be pretty good. That's going to be a battle for a playoff spot in the NFC in all likelihood. Falcons Lions, same thing. I like Bills Commanders. I think that's a little sneaky. I think the Commanders are either going to show that the first 2 weeks were kind of a fluke against two teams without a win, or they're going to show that Eric Bieniemy, Sam Howell, and company are for real. I also sneakily like Jets Patriots. I think this is one where this number in the preseason was Jets -4.5. Now it's Jets +2.5, +3. And I think that that's giving way too much, credit to what the Patriots could do offensively against the Jets defense. That's going to be better than any defense they've seen all season so far. That's one where I think the Jets, I think they have a really good chance to win outright in that one. Titans Browns, another good one. 2 1-1 teams that I think have some expectations this year. The Ravens are banged up. So are the Colts. You're not going to see Anthony Richardson. So that one might end up being a little bit of a pillow fight with the Ravens just trying to get out of that game healthy. And then Texans Jaguars, big spread there. I think the Jaguars are going to be a frequent pick in survivor leagues as a result. And then you look at the 4 o'clock hour, and my God, this might be like a nap time for people, right? You have Bears Chiefs. Cowboys, Arizona, Cardinals, those are 2 12-point or more spreads, but then you have Panthers, Seahawks, which is a low total with the Seahawks laying 6.5. This probably would be closer to 7 if Bryce Young and his struggles were playing, but you're going to see Andy Dalton. That 4 o'clock hour, I think the league probably wants to have that one back. And similarly, on Sunday Night Football, Raiders laying 2.5 against the Steelers team that so far has played the two of the league's best defenses and have struggled offensively. That one's one where I think that the market is underrating the Steelers, but obviously I have a ton of respect for the market there. And then you have Rams, Bengals, Eagles, Bucks. We're assuming Burrow in this analysis right now, but given the spread is only -3 and it'd probably be closer to a touchdown if it was Joe Burrow, there's probably some hints in the market that it could be somebody like Jake Browning starting Monday night. And then Eagles, Bucks, this thing has trended downward. The Bucks at one point were 7-point dogs, and now it's 5. I think people are looking at the Eagles and saying, are they as impressive as our priors were preseason? And the answer is probably no. Especially Hurts has really struggled so far to reclaim some of the magic he had in the passing game. So again, at SumerSports on Twitter, if you're looking forward to some of this stuff, and SumerSports.com/subscribe is our website if you want to subscribe to our newsletter, which has all this great information on it. Before I go, I'll answer some questions. We got some interesting questions here. Can we talk about the Bears situation? I know you love polls, but this ain't looking good. I root for, I know Ryan, we helped him a lot when he was with the Chiefs, and obviously know him now, the GM of the Bears. I've said it, I think the expectations were way too high on the Bears this year. And, my biggest, and I know that this is kind of like me trying to make a insult sandwich, but my worry was always that I thought that they were overrated going into the year as they had the same win total as the Packers. So evidently they were overrated. And I always worry about teams that have huge expectations that are not necessarily warranted and not the fault of Matt Eberflus or Ryan Poles, right? I think Ryan Poles, for a GM who took over a roster that needed almost a complete overhaul, has done a great job. But complete overhauls, what the Bengals did in 2021, going from 2-14 to a Super Bowl appearance in 2 years, that's rare. We're not seeing that most of the time. And so I think everybody that sees a young, exciting quarterback is going to almost always, over-index on things that the Bengals do, or the Jaguars last year, going from 2 straight number 1 overall picks to a playoff appearance and a playoff win. I think a lot of people are going to overrate teams like that because of some of the outliers. And what I don't want for Pitts and what I don't want for Eberflus. I'm much more into what Poles is doing than Eberflus. I think that there's a little bit of worry. I know a lot of people like Luke Getsy. I think there's a lot of evidence that they're not doing as well as far as scheme that's concerned. That's not my expertise. I would like for them to get more of a chance to show what they're capable of doing. And what I'd really like for the media, especially people who cover the Bears, from more of a fan perspective. So I like the All City groups. I like CHGO, and I've been on their shows before. I'd like for those entities to not fan the flames. And I know that's part of how their bread is buttered, but I'd like for, analytics people oftentimes get the bad rap for being haters, but it's no, we're here to properly set expectations. And so what I would really like is for Poles have, more realistic expectations. And then we can see if his plan is actually going to work, as opposed to killing it off before we even see that. There's a monsoon in the Ravens game as well. Yeah. That's one where I would have liked to use them in Survivor if that was an option for me, but there's just too much uncertainty there. And the Ravens are another team where, again, I really, the Ravens have, tried and true success. But there's a lot of uncertainty there, and there's a lot of injuries, man. Odell, Marcus Williams, obviously, Marlon Humphrey we knew about. A lot of injuries that were not terribly good for them. Liali 5. Just back to your 2 quarterback pick thought. Even if your first quarterback hits, you could trade the second quarterback, pick and recoup some of or most of your draft capital. If your first one doesn't hit, you can play the second one and recoup some draft capital by trading the pick. Dude, look, Josh Rosen went for a second-round pick in year 2, and that is after all these other teams knew that the Arizona Cardinals thought he sucked, right? Because it's different. If you have both guys at the same time, you can even be better than what the Cardinals did, because when the Cardinals moved off of Josh Rosen, That was after they selected Murray in the first overall pick. That's telling the whole league, that you don't think Josh Rosen is any good, and they still were able to get a second round pick for him. If you were holding both guys and kind of coy about it and playing one over the other is one thing, but playing like actively going out and spending more money or more capital on the quarterback in the case of Murray to jettison Rosen, that was a very aggressive move, and it's still like in some ways, it still in some ways is like they were still able to get that for Rosen. So I think that's the floor for what you could get if you draft two guys high, because when the other part is a lot of these other teams, when they like a player, they latch onto their eval of him for a long time. That's why the Vikings trade for Cam Akers. That's why they traded for Hawkinson. Like they have these evals and they stick to them. Like Brett Veach, gets DeAndre Baker, he gets Ronald Jones, he gets all these. They stick to their eval for a long time. So if you take a player high, those teams are not going to be all of a sudden out on a player because he's not on their roster. They'll continue to monitor that situation. And if he shows any sort of promise, you're going to be able to get some value there. So good point there by Leali. I really wonder why the Bears didn't reach out to Greg Roman. I know Fields is an alarm, but probably could help. Yeah, I mean, the issue with Roman, though, is like you would have to have fired Getsy last year. And like, honestly, the Bears, at the second half of the season, the offense wasn't really their problem. And some of it was fluky, some of it was rushing by the quarterback, which I know is not necessarily the most sustainable thing. But like Getsy, we got to deal with the information that's available to us. Yeah, after 2 games, seeing how this has gone, it might make sense to move on. But going into the season, Getsy had done some pretty impressive things with Fields in the second half of last year, playing to his strengths and stuff. And I think that, we still got to be careful there. But I do think Roman would be a good option for them should they consider moving on. I think he, is one of those guys who does a good job of playing to the league's left hand a little bit, as opposed to trying to do what everybody else is trying to do, for sure. Any more questions from the chat? Just kind of looking them up here. We really appreciate you coming out here. ZWSFNJ. Pitt's not making the Pro Bowl next 2 years is going to cost him $1.9 million on the 5th year, losing money on the second contract by week 2. Wouldn't be shocked if a trade request is made in the next 24 months. Yeah, I mean, we've seen players who have been treated a lot better. And I'm not trying to bag the Falcons. They're 2-0, right? So whatever they're doing is working from a wins and losses perspective. But like we've seen, like A.J. Brown was throwing the ball a lot by the Titans. Deebo Samuel was throwing the ball a lot by the Niners, handed the ball a lot, and he still demanded a trade. So not getting the football 8 targets the first 2 weeks after averaging 6 targets a game last year, like, yeah, he might want the ball. And look, the first play of the game, they went right to Drake London. No catches in the first game. So maybe they'll make an effort to give Pitts the ball next week, but we'll never know what's going through the mind of Arthur Smith, who, again, is engineering good offense for sure, but at the expense maybe of Kyle Pitts. And I think, obviously good for the league if Pitts can make some plays because he's a phenomenal talent. So that'll do it for me. Appreciate all of you for coming. Appreciate you all. By the way, from the bottom of my heart, for everybody that listens to the show, thank you all for going out there and buying Football Analytics with Python and R. It's the number one book right now selling on Amazon in Python programming, in data mining. I think it's top 5 in R, top 10 in football, which, by the way, that's incredibly fun to have that kind of range. I'm excited for that. Again, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you all for your support, and it really means a lot to me. I appreciate all of you, and I appreciate you coming in on a Friday to talk football with me. On Monday, Thomas Mitroff and I will be back reviewing all of the games from this past weekend and previewing another 2 football game night on Monday Night Football. So thank you all for coming. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Also give our pals at Stats and Scheme, as well as the Odd Man Front, go ahead and give them a listen as well if you have time. I know we're inundated with podcasts nowadays. So for myself, Eric Eager, this has been the Sumer Sports Show.